Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Gopijana Vallabha Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Gopijana Vallabha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Gopijana Vallabha Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Gopijana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Gopijana Vallabha Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacarya Ashto Tarasvata Shishi Mati Divine Grace of High Charana Ravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Iskcon Bibhiti Founder Charya Save the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacarya Ashto Tarasvata Shishi Mati Divine Grace of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Namacharya Shri Rasta Kuriki Prem Sagaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Hari Gaura Bhakta Vrindaki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gokovana Shamakund Radha Kun Giri Govardhana Ki Braj Bhumi Shivandamadama Ki Navadip Mayapur Dhamma Ki Purushtam Chatra Dharapur Dhamma Ki Ganga Mai Ki Jamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Sama Veta Bhakta Vrindaki Jainita Go Premanandi All glory somebody's, all glory somebody's, all glory somebody's, all glory, Sri Sri Guru and Sri Granga. All glory to Prabhupada ki jai. Krishna Okay, so this is a prose verse. Atha, kadācit, kaścid, vṛṣala-patir, bhadra Kālī, puruṣa-paśum, ālabhatāpatya-kāmaḥ. No idea how to chant it. Atha kadācit, kaścid, vṛṣala-patir, Bhadra Kālī, puruṣa-paśum, ālabhatāpatya-kāmaḥ. Now someone else can try. I always get a bit lost with these prose verses. Would someone else like to try chanting? No? Okay. Atha, thereafter. Kadācit, at some time. Kaścit, some. vṛṣala-patir, the leader of the śūdras, engaged in plundering the property of others. Bhadra Kālī, unto the goddess, known as Bhadra Kālī. Puruṣa-paśum, an animal in the shape of a man. Ālabhata, started to sacrifice. Apatya-kāmaḥ, desiring a son. Translation. At this time, being desirous of obtaining a son, a leader of dacoits who came from a śūdra family wanted to worship the goddess Bhadra Kālī by offering her in sacrifice a dull man who is considered no better than an animal. Responsively. At this time, being desirous of obtaining a son, a leader of dacoits who came from a śūdra family wanted to worship the goddess Bhadra Kālī by offering her in sacrifice a dull man who is considered no better than an animal. So we see that Jad Bharat, or as we understand Bharat Maharaj, because so you might look at this and think, oh, that's his karma, because of his activities or because of past life and that. But because he's lived his life in a way that he's tried to avoid interaction with materialistic people, therefore he, like his father wanted to be a brahmana and wanted to act like a brahmana, and he did everything backwards. His father was teaching him how to do archman, how to, bathe after, going to the bathroom and to wash himself with earth, and he'd do it before. He'd bathe before he went to the bathroom. He just did everything backwards. And his whole idea was to just discourage his father from teaching him these things, because he was just absorbed in Krishna. So, one might think, well, now he's getting taken by these dacoits to be offered to the goddess Bhadra Kālī. This is his karma. But we can understand from the commentary here of the Acharyas, Srila Prabhupada, Vishakhavati Thakur and others, they're explaining that actually his karma was completely finished. In his past life as a deer, he lived out, he exhausted all that karma, so he had no karma. So we can understand that these are actually the arrangements of the Supreme Person of Godhead. This is also explained in relation to, we see that when Bharat Maharaj, so there's 14 chapters. This canto's got 26 chapters in it. 14 chapters are focusing on the dynasty of Priyavrata. So first 3 chapters you have Maharaj Priyavrata, then Agnidra, then Nabhi, then Rishabdev. 3 chapters on Rishabdev. Then 2 chapters, I think it's 7 and 8, on Bharat Maharaj. So we see that the Acharyas describe how, due to, or the Bhagavatam describes how due to his inattention that Bharat Maharaj, he's purposely inattentive in his devotional service. That even though he was at the level of Bhava, purposely he was inattentive, and therefore he seemingly fell from that position as Bharat Maharaj and became a deer in his next life. And one might wonder, well, why is it that such a great personality could have that outcome from his process of bhakti? So there's many lessons that are being taught here in this section. It's a very, very important section actually in the Bhagavatam. Because we learn... I thought I was. No problems. Is that better? Yeah. So many, many really important lessons are being taught in this section of the Bhagavatam. Now, the first thing we can see is one needs to be very careful on the spiritual path. Srila Prabhupada would sometimes say it's like a razor's edge. Now, modern day we don't have much experience of cutthroat razors, but I know if you go to a barber here in India, still they use an open blade. And, I always get worried they're sort of holding up like this and they're going like this. You think, one slip and the guy will kill me. All they have to do is go like that and you're dead, These modern razors, the Gillette things and stuff like that, you don't have to worry about that. But Prabhupada would describe that spiritual life is sometimes just like a razor's edge. If you're not careful, if you're not attentive, blood. Yeah? So he was inattentive, therefore he fell from his spiritual practice. So the same is there for us. If we're not very attentive in following the process of bhakti as it's given by the acharyas, then very easily we can become distracted or wander off on the path. I remember years ago I was somewhere in Russia, and there was this big excavation going on near the temple where I was staying, and there was no, like where I live in Australia, whenever there's an excavation there's guardrails, there's no way known you could fall into it, but there was just a big hole and nothing to stop. So I thought, if a blind person walked along here or someone walked along here in the middle of the night with no light or anything like that, they could easily fall into this ditch. And that's like this andaya tandaya upaniyamanas te pisha tantramudi. The blind people led by another blind person, they miss the right path and they fall into the ditch of material life. And they become urudamnibhata, they become bound up by these very strong ropes. So we see that in the spiritual path, if we're not very careful to protect ourselves from the pitfalls of the material world, then very easily we can fall down. And we see this happens again and again and again. Devotees come, they practice for some time, maybe sometimes a long time, and they become a little bit inattentive. They might think, well, now I'm advanced devotee, I don't have to follow the morning program, I don't have to do this, I don't have to do that. And we see that very easily one can lose their enthusiasm in the practice of bhakti if we're not careful. Enthusiasm comes from very strictly maintaining our practice of bhakti, by very attentively maintaining. And of course, this is going to have various, it's individual. It's like, okay, in the beginning stage we all follow the same thing, but as we evolve in devotional service, we find that, like some people are attracted to one type of service, some people are attracted to another type of service. Or in deity worship, you'll see, some people really like all the rituals, mantras and doing all that sort of stuff, whereas other people, they're very much attracted by dressing. Other devotees are attracted by festivals. So we're individual, and we have our attraction. But the whole idea is to nurture the attraction for Krishna, not that we get distracted by the material nature. And this is what Jad Bharat's doing. He's saying, okay, I got distracted by this in my past life. I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to be very, very careful to make sure no distractions afflict me. And so this is a very important lesson for us, is to be mindful that if we're not careful, we can be attracted by material nature very easily. And there's a beautiful verse in the 7th chapter of the Gita. Seventh chapter is very, this middle section of the Gita is very, very important, and the seventh chapter is the beginning of the middle section of the Gita. The middle section of the Gita is actually the essence of the Gita, right? And in the seventh chapter, there's a nice verse there where Krishna says, "Daevesha gunami mamamaya duratya mameva jay prapadyante mayam tam taranti." He says, this divine energy of mine consisting of the three modes of material nature, he says, duratyaya, very difficult to overcome. And practically speaking, it's impossible. It's just like, someone trying to stop the wind, and Arjuna, he uses this analogy he uses this analogy to Krishna, and he says, well, I think to control the mind is more difficult than to stop the raging wind. And you can imagine, just like, yesterday I was out at Rohini, and the wind blowing through was so strong. And try to stop that wind. Just put your hands up and stop the wind and see how successful you are. You can't stop it. It just blows. And when they have these cyclones or tornadoes and things like that, very, very strong wind. No one can stop it. No matter how much you try, you can't stop it. And the mind is like that. The senses are like that. You can't stop them. So we need some assistance. And this is also the point that we see here in this pastime, is that the real way of overcoming the influence of the mind and the senses is, as we see Jad Bharat's doing, and as is pointed out in this verse from the seventh chapter of the Gita, he says, "Mameva jay prapadyantam mayam me tam taranti." But those who surrender unto me, prapadyante, they surrender to me, they can easily cross beyond it. And there's a very nice verse given in the 14th chapter of the 10th canto. It says, "Samashritiye patava paravam mahatpatam punyo yasha marare bhavam buddhi vatsa param padam yadvita padam nate sham." So it describes how this material world is like an ocean. And I don't know if any of you have ever flown over an ocean, but sometimes it takes, tomorrow I'm flying back to Australia, and then I go to Singapore, and then from there I go to Australia. It takes 7 hours to fly from Singapore, or 8 hours actually, from Singapore to Australia. Most of that is traveling over ocean. And they're doing like 600-700 miles an hour flying over ocean. Long way. Can you imagine if someone just dropped you in the middle of the ocean? How would you get out? Would you swim? You get dropped in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 3,000-4,000 kilometers to anywhere. What are you going to do? You going to swim? No chance of it. Like sometimes people swim across the English Channel. It's about 30-40 kilometers. That's not very much. I mean, for me, it'd be, I couldn't do it. It's too far. But you imagine dropping someone, even the best swimmer, you drop them in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. What are they going to do? They're going to die. Simple as that. So the material world is like that. It's like a vast ocean, so much greater than some small ocean like the Pacific Ocean. And what hope do we have in this material world? There's no hope. There's no way of getting out on your own. There's no way of escaping the influence of the material world. But as is pointed out by Lord Brahma, he says that those who take shelter of the boat of the lotus feet of Murari, who's the giver of liberation, then for them, the water in this mighty ocean, he says, vatsapadam, it becomes like the hoof print of a calf. And we know, anyone who's had any experience around cows, that the hoof print of a calf is about this round. Yeah? Now, who can cross over that? Even a little child can do it. Even the smallest child can easily step over that without any problem. So this is the nature of the process of bhakti. We may try to our best endeavor to overcome the influence of the mind and senses, but they are so powerful, they are so strong. The influence of the material nature is so strong, actually, for a conditioned living entity, it's insurmountable. Prabhupada would use this word quite often. It's insurmountable. You cannot overcome it on your own. Therefore, I give you we take shelter of someone like Krishna, or the spiritual master, because in the face of Krishna, the material nature is insignificant. It's nothing. I had an experience when I was a child. I was a very passive child. I didn't like fighting or anything like that. Although I used to argue with my brothers a lot, but I didn't like fighting or anything violent. But the area I grew up in was is what they call a housing commission area, where a lot of economically disadvantaged people live. And when people, as Shakespeare would say, that poverty it breeds all bad qualities. So the area we lived in, people were not particularly good quality. And so at school, there was a lot of bullies, people who like to, pick on, weaker people, younger people, stuff. So I used to get that all the time. I used to get picked on. But then my brother happened to become friends of this one person in the school who was like the toughest guy in the school. He was really big, muscly guy, And he liked me. And as soon as people found out that he liked me, no one would pick on me anymore. Yeah? So even though I wasn't strong, because I had a friend who was strong, then I was protected. So in the same way, we may think we're strong in this material world, but we're actually insignificant. But if we have a friend in Krishna, we're completely protected. Yeah? So this is also what's happening here with Bharat. Now, another interesting point in this story is one may think, well, he fell down and became a deer because of his inattention. But actually the acharyas, they give the commentary that this was actually Krishna's arrangement to deepen his attachment for him. And they give evidence, they point out that we see that in his next life as a deer, what did he do? He remembered Krishna. How many deer can do that? That's not ordinary, that's not common. And he shunned the association of other deers. And what did he do? He lived around the ashram of sages. So you can see that, because of this circumstance, the Acharya is explaining, actually, Krishna was making an arrangement so his attachment, because he was right on the border, right on the threshold of prema. He was almost there, but just a little bit of intention. So the Lord made a special arrangement for him. So that he actually got to in his next life, he said, okay, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to get distracted. And he actually had this opportunity as a deer to remember Krishna, to practice deepen his bhakti. And then he took birth as Jad Bharat, who was the son of a perfected brahmana who came in the line of Angira Muni. And in that life, he all his karmas were completely, his parabdha, aparabdha, all this karma completely gone. It mentions in one verse in the, not the 2 chapters, 10th chapter it mentions, that his karmas were all completely destroyed. So he wasn't living out any karma, even though he was, like seeming to be like a dumb man, it wasn't karma. It's just he was choosing that path to avoid the interaction or the influence of materialistic people. He didn't want to get distracted. He just wanted to, even his father's trying to teach him to be a perfect brahmana, because his father was a very, very, strict brahmana. And his father's trying to teach him that, but he didn't want to get influenced by that. He didn't want to take the chance that might distract him into becoming, a materialistic or worldly minded, because his brothers, he had 9 brothers and 1 sister, I think. Because his father had 2 wives, and by the first wife there was, I think, 9 brothers, and then by the second wife there was a son and a daughter, the boy and a girl. And even though all his brothers were very, very strict followers of the Veda, they were completely materialistic. They had no understanding of the process of bhakti. So he didn't want to go down that path. He just wanted to stay focused on Krishna. So internally, he was completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness, yet externally, he seemed like a dumb person. He didn't speak, whenever they tried to get him to do something, he would do it wrong. His brothers are trying to get him to look after the fields, to plow the fields and things like that, and he's messing it up. He's making some parts low, some parts high. When he digs the earth, he does it wrong. Everything he did wrong. And then they're just treating him so poorly. Yet, he didn't respond. They're treating him like an animal, but they themselves, in the way they're responding to Jad Bharat, were actually behaving like animals, whereas he himself was completely absorbed in thoughts of the Lord. They would feed him all sorts of rubbish, just all the rejected food. They'd feed him worm-eaten beans. They'd feed him, like when they squeeze sesame seeds and things to get the oil out, then they have the leftovers, and they were feeding him that because it was useless. They could feed it to animals, or they'd feed him the burnt grains from the bottom of the pot. But he always saw this as nectar. Whatever came, he accepted. He didn't try to make any endeavor for palatable foodstuffs. He was completely liberated. There's no endeavor to try to satisfy his senses in any way, shape, or form. And he was always happy in the service of Krishna. Yet externally, he appeared like a dumb person. And it's described how, I think it's in the previous chapter, how because, actually no, it's in this chapter, it describes how because he was always dirty, appeared to be very, very dirty and covered in dust and mud and things like that, his spiritual effulgence was obscured, where people actually couldn't see his transcendental nature. And what happened here, we'll see in the next few verses, because up to verse 15 it's describing this whole event of how the dacoits, they capture him and they take him to sacrifice him. And they saw him out in the field and they just thought, well, he looks like a really strong man animal. We can sacrifice him to Kālī. And they were very, very happy. They were, great, we've got a perfect person, because what had happened is they captured one person they got off him, but he escaped. And so then they're wandering in the field and they see Jad Bharat, who's sitting in the field, protecting the field from deers and other animals coming to eat the crop. And so they captured him, they took him off, they washed him, they bound him, but still they didn't understand his nature. So this is another lesson we see here, that one who's very, very advanced in Krishna consciousness is not so much interested in external arrangements or in trying to satisfy themselves or trying to make a comfortable arrangement. He'd sleep whatever was arranged, he'd sleep there. If his family members wanted him to do some work so he could get some food, he'd do it, and he ate whatever they gave him, completely satisfied. When people would be disrespectful or offensive to him, he didn't respond to it. He didn't react. He didn't he'd get upset. And we see in the next chapter, I think it is, when Rahugana comes across Jad Bharat and then decides to engage him as his helpers decide to engage him as a palanquin carrier. And what happens is because he's walking down the path and he sees ants there and he doesn't want to stand on the ants, so he's kind of walking in a bit of an uneven way and it's causing the palanquin to rock. And Rahugana becomes very upset about that. And then so he gets down from the palanquin and he starts to chastise like anything. He's really abusive towards Jad Bharat. And he's calling him, you're foolish, or this, or that, you're weak, or you're mad, or, And then Jad Bharat, he says, all these things may be true, but they don't apply to me because I'm not the body. You can say this about the body, but whatever it is, but that's not me, so it doesn't apply to me. And therefore we can see, because he had this deep understanding of not being it wasn't something he just believed. Like we might read the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, in the second chapter. There's a lot of information there about how we're not the body, and we accept that intellectually. But how many of us actually realize we're not the body? We can see with Jad Bharat, he completely realized it because he wasn't concerned about what he ate. You could interpret that in two ways. Either he's mad, or he's very realized. And this is how we see that Sukadeva Goswami is presenting it here. Is either he's completely mad, and you see, here in India, for instance, you see lots of poor people around the place who are completely stark raving mad. Yeah? But possibly they could be very, very spiritually elevated. You don't really know because they're hiding themselves externally. And we see that this kind of demeanor has been present in many great souls. Just like if we go back to chapter 5 and 6, Rishabdev. Right? He at one point he took on the mode of practice of a Jagarvritti. He behaved like a python and just laid on the ground. And some people who don't understand will think, well, he's just crazy. But actually, it was understood that he was very, very, he's an incarnation of Godhead, but he's manifesting very, very elevated symptoms. We also see with Shukadeva Goswami. People just thought he was just strange. He didn't wear any clothes. He just walked around the place, and yet he was still constantly absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. We see also Prahlad Maharaj when he actually ascended to the throne and he was the king. He came upon a sadhu who was living like a python, and just whatever came to him in the form of food, he would accept that. He wouldn't go looking for nice foodstuffs and things like that. But we find that what we do is like, oh, I'll eat this because I like the taste of it. No, I don't like the taste of that. We're doing that all the time. Everything we're choosing. Oh, I'm not going to go there, it's too cold, or I've got to put on a chadar because it's cold, or I've got to take some clothes off because it's hot. But Jad Bharat wasn't like that. He didn't discriminate. He just, he had a stout, strong body, but he wasn't affected by heat or cold, rain, sunshine, anything like that. He just remained absorbed in thoughts of the Lord. And the same with his food stuff. Dress. He didn't dress himself. He just wore a loincloth. And it's described. He only had two things on. He had a loincloth and a Brahman thread. And his Brahman thread was black. Because he didn't bathe himself. He wasn't concerned with all these externals. That's a very, very elevated consciousness. We can't, avoid cleaning ourselves and thinking we're very advanced. No, that's actually, at our stage of bhakti, well, at least I can talk from my perspective, the stage of bhakti I'm practicing is called Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So part of sadhana, on the Vaidhi means you're following rules, so part of that means we bathe regularly. Srila Prabhupada would encourage devotees to bathe 2 or 3 times a day. So, we can't imitate the activities of great soul, because actually we see those who imitate, Prabhupada would say, those who imitate, they fall down. One should not artificially present themselves as being more advanced than they are. Whereas we see Jad Bharat, a very, very advanced person. And, it's a very, very interesting pastime, and we can see many powerful lessons we can learn from this story. Also, we see how what's going to happen in the next few verses is that because these dacoits have offended or tried to offend a great personality, then Bhadra Kālī killed them. So also it's talking about being mindful not to offend devotees. But Rahugana, he's much more intelligent than that. He realized actually, when Jad Bharat started this, at first he thought that Jad Bharat was just an ignorant person, just a strong, bullish type of person with no intelligence. But then when he started to chastise Jad Bharat and Jad Bharat responded to him, then he realized, because he was hearing transcendental knowledge, he realized actually this is a very, very advanced person. So you can understand a person when they speak. And Srila Prabhupada sometimes he would say that when a person is thought a fool, he shouldn't speak, because if he speaks, you remove all doubt. And as soon as they speak, you can hear they speak all sorts of nonsense. Sometimes you hear people when they're speaking so-called spiritual subjects. My son has a yoga studio, and so he's a devotee, he's an initiated devotee. But when he gives his presentation, you can see it's just he's presenting the teachings of Lord Chaitanya in a very friendly way, so people who aren't devotees can sort of start to understand the higher truth, and then they start to inquire, and that they come to the practice of bhakti. Also, where I live in Australia, they have a yoga school there, and same thing there is devotees who are doing most of the training, and they present Krishna consciousness to these people in a way that's palatable to them. And eventually what we see happening is they're giving up their sinful activities, and then they're taking to the process of bhakti. You see after a few months they're chanting japa, they're attending the morning program, they're coming to Bhagavatam class, and they're just becoming devotees. So there's different ways of presenting Krishna consciousness that can affect the hearts of people. So, but what you hear with the yoga teachers, the other yoga teachers who aren't devotees, they just make up their own philosophy. Just whatever comes into mind. And we see here, in the next verse it talks about, it says svavadina. it talks about how these dacoits, they just made up their own process of worship. Whatever they thought was a good thing, and they start to chant their mantras and they do all the different rituals and stuff like that. Because Prabhupada, he mentions that in the Vedic scriptures, it talks about how you can offer, chickens and goats and different animals to Kali, but it never talks about offering a man. It never talks about offering a human being. So they manufactured that. And we see in Kali Yuga that's so much the case is people manufacture their own process of worship. Because they don't want to perform any austerity. They don't want to follow any rules and regulations. They just want to do whatever they want to do and have some kind of notion that they're getting spiritual benefit. But actually, as we see, it's described in the Bhagavatam, they're like, people who follow these so-called gurus or spiritual leaders. It's just like, it's like everyone's getting on a lead boat, and you know what, if you put lead in water, what happens? You know what lead is? Very, very heavy, dense metal. Yeah? So you put lead in water, it can be a nice boat. You put it in water, it's going to sink. And all the people on the boat following these so-called gurus, they'll sink along with the guru. So they're all going down to hell. Because why? Because they're not following an authorized process of devotional service. They're following their own mental concoctions. And that's what happens to these dacoits, is because they're following their own mental concoctions, they're all killed by Kali. And she kills them with great happiness. So, many interesting points come out in this story, particularly, about the danger of the material world and how we need to be very, very mindful of the effects of material nature and how powerful material nature is and how, our insignificantness in comparison to material nature. Also, that one can never really understand who's an advanced devotee, who's not an advanced devotee. It's very, very difficult. There are some external symptoms, but we see that very, very advanced devotees tend to keep these things internal. We see there was Vṛṣala Babaji Maharaj, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would not allow his disciples to spend time with Vṛṣala Babaji because he was very, very elevated, but he was a bit of an avadut. So his external conduct was not in keeping with the normal practices of sadhana bhakti. So they wouldn't understand. And we see that happens even in this day and age. We see in Iskcon that devotees might read different literatures, for instance, which are written by the Goswamis, which are targeting those who have a very, very advanced stage of devotional service. And they read these literatures and they misunderstand. Or they might start to get influenced by Rasika Bhav or something like that, which is a very, very elevated stage. It's not authorized, but it's very, very elevated. And we see that Srila Prabhupada and his spiritual master, etc., they would tend to direct devotees towards Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, because that's the stage of devotional service we're at. We've all come from this conditioned nature. We've come from a conditioned background where we're trying to exploit the resources of the material world and then trying to go straight to the most elevated stage of devotional service. We just get confused. One has to actually go through the process in order to remove the different anarthas from the heart. Therefore, thereby when we get to this, we make the progress in devotional service, we don't become bewildered about the conclusion. We don't become bewildered about the identity of Krishna and his associates. But if one, in the beginning stages, tries to practice these very, very advanced stages of bhakti, then you become bewildered and actually lose sight of the goal. So, many, many important points here, many important instructions. There's a short purport. Low-class men such as śūdras worship demigods like Goddess Kālī or Bhadra Kālī for the fulfillment of material desires. To this end, they sometimes kill a human being before the deity. They generally choose a person who is not very intelligent. In other words, an animal in the shape of a man. So also here we see the worshippers of these deities, etc., they generally, their worship is only for the purpose of fulfilling material desires. And we see that in Iskcon, this is something I've been pushing a lot on lately, is sometimes temples are asking to install devatas in the temple because then they think they can attract people who worship devotees. Of course they'll attract people who worship devotees, but those people will start to influence what's going on in Iskcon, and will become more and more a Hindu society rather than a spiritual society. Krishna consciousness has nothing to do with that. Krishna consciousness is completely transcendental in the material world. But if we get influenced by all this Devata worship, or the people who come to worship the Devatas, then we'll lose sight of pure Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada makes a very clear point in the Adi Leela, chapter 14, that he says we have no business with this demigod worship, and neither do we want to encourage them. He says, why do we want to encourage them to worship someone from this material world? What can someone from this material world give you? Birth, death, old age, and disease, that's it. No, we want to encourage people to worship Krishna exclusively, because by worshipping Krishna exclusively, they'll get out of this material world and go back home to Godhead. Nothing else will help them. So, having devatas in a temple to try to attract people, it doesn't work. What attracts people is purity. What attracts people is the pure siddhanta of Krishna consciousness. So we distribute books, we have Harinam Sankirtan, and we tell them about Krishna. Give them Krishna prasad. That's what's going to attract people back to Godhead, not devata worship or any other, distraction. It's just like it happened to Bharat Maharaj. He got distracted by a deer. So we can very easily get distracted by the things of this world. It's so easy to get distracted. The whole material world is just a big distraction from start to finish. It's all it is. So in order for us to go back home to Godhead, we need to, as Krishna says to Arjuna in the Gita, we need to have this ekehe kurunanda. We need to have this one-pointed attention on Krishna. Anything else will get distracted, and we'll lose sight of the goal. We'll wander off on the path. So, all these new ideas that keep coming up, they're going to keep coming up. It's just the nature of the material world. But we need to keep our focus exclusively on Krishna. And in that way, we can be guaranteed of the result. In that way, we can be guaranteed of eventually going back home to Godhead, if we just keep our focus on Krishna. Okay, so I'm not sure when I'm supposed to finish, but I'll finish there. Any comments, questions? Yeah, so, any questions at all? Yeah. I think there's a microphone coming because I can't quite hear. Hare Krishna, Krishna. The fastest moving mic.
Thank you, Guruji. Like you spoke very nicely about many application point. You have to be very careful. You have to find out the pitfalls and protect ourselves. A lot of lessons you told us. Guruji, you at last you said about the distractions. There are many distractions in the material world, even in the spiritual life also. When we come in the moment, we have the innocent, pure desire is to please Krishna, please Guru. But as we go on, there are many allurements, many attractions, even in the devotional life. So how to keep that pure desire till the end, and which we have come for. So
yeah, there are actually no distractions in spiritual life. Yeah? That's material life. But we're thinking. Yeah, we're thinking. It's like, clothes. You can wear cotton clothes, you can wear silk clothes. But thinking that I need to wear silk clothes because because silk's better. That's just a distraction. I mean, I wear silk clothes because I do deity worship, and you can take it on and off many times. You wear cotton, you wear it once, you have to wash it. Whereas silk clothes, I'm on and off the altar, throughout the day. So, but if I'm wearing silk clothes because I think it's attractive, because I think it's sensual or whatever like that, that's just a distraction. So every single thing you have, your beads, your mobile phone, your glasses, whatever it is you have, either you can do it for Krishna, or it can be something that takes you away from Krishna. So the real thing is, whatever you have is to connect it with Krishna. Yukta Vairagya. You know? And Bhaktisiddhanta, he said about Srila Prabhupada, he's understood this principle of Yukta Vairagya, how to use everything in Krishna's service. So you know, we've all got these things, right? Now you can do different things with this. You can be, you know, using this in Krishna's service, like you got the Veda base on here, you read Bhagavad Gita, whatever, or you can be using it to do nonsense. It's the same energy, but by connecting it with Krishna, it becomes transcendental. And as long as we keep it, it's just like Prabhupada would use the analogy of sticking the iron rod in the fire. As long as the iron rod stays in the fire, what is it? Is it iron or is it fire? It's fire. As soon as you take it out of the fire, it starts to lose that nature. And if you stick it in water, instantly it's lost the nature. So it's the same for us. It's such a simple thing. We just need to keep ourselves in the fire. And Prabhupada would say this so many times, to keep yourself in the fire of devotional service. And the way we do this is by hearing and chanting, always. We see that Jad Bharat, that's what he's doing. He's always, maybe he's not manifesting externally, because he doesn't want people to know that he's a great devotee, because otherwise they'll come and worship him, they'll want to touch his feet, and it's like, you know, it's so weird to have people touching your feet, you know, it's just so weird. No one does it in Australia. You know? It just doesn't happen, you know. And like, you know, he didn't want that to happen. He didn't want people to give him garlands and to bow down, all this. No, he didn't want. He just wanted to focus on Krishna. So he kept it all internal. You know? And even that can be such a distraction. It's like, it's so common that when one becomes advanced in devotional service or has a position in the society, that people want to bow down, they want to touch your feet, they want to, you know, do service for you, they want to give you garlands, all this type of stuff. And then the danger is we start to think that, yes, I deserve this. Yeah? So you see many advanced devotees, they avoid this like anything. They don't like to have followers, they don't, you know, they avoid these things because it's a distraction, or can be a distraction. The main thing is like, you know, just to work out in the most effective way we can, just to stay absorbed in Krishna, whether it's chanting, whether it's, you know, because there's 9 processes of bhakti. You can engage in any of those 9 processes of bhakti, or all those 9 processes of bhakti. And this will help us to keep our focus exclusively on Krishna. But as soon as we start to do something else, we'll drift off. So even though one may be doing management, that's fine, do management, but do it for Krishna. One may have a job, you know, because there's many devotees who come to the temple here who have a job, or they're at home looking after their families and things like that. That's fine. That can take you away from Krishna, or that can lead you to Krishna. So if you do that business for Krishna, like if you have a business, you're selling cloth or whatever it is you're doing, do that for Krishna's pleasure. Just like I remember coming here a few years ago when Sutta was doing the service of head pujari, and he took me to a jewelry store, and he explained to me that every festival this man would donate jewelry for the deities. So he's doing his jewelry business. Obviously he's making a lot of money, but there's some element of it, he's not a devotee as such, but there's some element of he's doing it for Krishna. So therefore he becomes purified by that activity. So whatever activity you're doing, if you're doing it for Krishna, it's a purifying activity. And this point is made in the 3rd chapter of the Gita, where he says, Yagda tat kamaronyatra loko yong kamabandhana. You know, the work has to be done. You have to work in this world. You can't be inactive. But if you don't do it for Krishna, it causes you to become bound up in this material world. But if you do it for Krishna, it's liberating. It's not, and the activity, you see the activities devotees perform and the activity the materialists perform, it's the same. They're reading, we're reading. They're reading the newspaper, we're reading Bhagavad Gita. You know, they're working for filling the material desires. We're working to please Krishna. Same activity, you just change the need, change the focus, the purpose. Yeah? It's the same thing. You just have to change why you do it. It's all about the why. Yeah? Is that okay? Something else?
Hare Krishna, Prati. Thank you very much for making us introspect on our directions in devotional service. My question is it's a chicken and egg kind of situation on this. You remarked in your lecture that it was that enthusiasm comes by attentively following devotional activities. And so how does one develop the enthusiasm to attentively follow devotional activities?
It's just like, if you look at the process of bhakti, it's broken into different stages. So, in the beginning stages, we come to devotional service and we hear that, okay, you're not this material body, you're suffering in this material world. And mostly we have some experience of suffering. You know, it's not like, you know, I came from a blissful background and it's like, you know, I was experiencing, you know, happiness. Some happiness is there, but usually it's illusory happiness. Yet we're understanding to some extent, and it's an intellectual understanding. You know, it's not deep. It's not a very deep understanding. Yet, you know, due to the fact of having some understanding, we're starting to think, okay, you know, the spiritual master or advanced devotees tell us, if I follow this process, I'll be able to get out of this situation. So there's a motive there. And that's what Vaidhi-sadhana bhakti is. It means there's a motive. If there's no motive, it's raga. You know, it's much more elevated. So because there's some kind of motive, we're motivated to practice bhakti, which is good. It's fine. It's as it says in the second canto. It says, "Akama sabakama moksha kamadari tibrena bhakti yogena yajeta puruṣam-param." Whether you have no material desire, you're full of material desire, you're desiring liberation, by all means worship Krishna. Because then, if you worship Krishna, the desire will become purified. Whereas if we worship anyone else, the desires will become more and more binding. They'll bind us up more in the material nature. So even though we may not have these strong desires, we can understand that if I follow this practice, then I will become purified. My desires will deepen. My desires will become purified. So this is Vaidhi. You just follow the rules and regulations, even though we don't want to. I mean, when we first come to devotional service, who likes getting up early in the morning? You know, it's a challenge. Who likes, bathing, early in the morning in the middle of winter? It's difficult. But still we do these things because we know they're purifying. There's so many practices we do because we know they're purifying. Problem comes, I see, is that when we become a little bit relaxed in our practice of bhakti, and we kind of think, oh, well, that was all right when I was young devotee, when I was a young brahmachari, but I don't need to do that now. No, we need to be strict with ourselves. We need to ensure that we chant our 16 rounds, we rise early, all these different things, and study the books. It's so important, because if we don't study Prabhupada's books, we'll lose sight of what our goal is. But when we read Prabhupada's books, constantly Srila Prabhupada is reminding us what the goal of life is. Constantly he's reminding us who we are. Constantly he's reminding us of our position in this material world, so we don't lose sight. And understanding that I'm just an infinitesimally small living entity, an eternal servant of Krishna, not thinking that I'm the controller, the enjoyer. So, and we should never have so much service that we don't have time to read Prabhupada's books. Even I practice this myself, and I encourage others. Even if you are very busy, at least read one sloka a day. I mean, personally, I try to read one chapter of the Gita a day, but I don't always manage to do that. But at least read one sloka a day. So we're learning. Very, very important to study Prabhupada's books. Yes, sir. Louder, because there's a plane flying overhead.
Sometimes we have mind convinces that anyway we are doing service, so even if you don't read, because I was observed in Krishna's service, so the mind is so tricky, and after some days it becomes an habit. And then it is demanding also. Service is very demanding. I have to attend. I cannot be fanatic also. Yeah. So that is actually, sometimes if I analyze this, actually I'm not much interested in reading book, but I'm just trying to substitute. But how to come out of this?
But we need, the thing is, as we progress in bhakti, we need to try to become a little bit analytical. Yeah, and this is actually the modes of material nature. See, this mentality you're describing is the influence of what mode? Rajagun, right? Because we get convinced that, oh yeah, I've got so much activity to do, Rajagun. Yeah, that I've got no time for these other things, you know. And I'm going to become purified by the service. Yeah, you will become purified by the service, but much slower. Yeah? If you can study the philosophy, this is going to be more effective, because you know, so many times you come across devotees who don't really understand the philosophy very well. So understand how the material nature works. This is the mode of goodness acting on our intelligence, is to see how the mode of material nature works on us, right? Understand, okay, I'm thinking I'm so busy, right? What's this? This is the influence of material nature, her potency of covering over my intelligence. And what happens is the intelligence becomes covered, and at some point it becomes so covered you don't actually see the reality. But by reading the philosophy, by regularly exposing ourselves to the philosophy, then we understand the way the material natures work. We understand how the mind, the intelligence, the senses influence the living entity to think that, oh, it's okay, I don't need to read these books. I don't need to, you know, do these practices. I don't need to rise early in the morning. I don't need to chant 16 rounds a day. I don't need this. These devotees, they're so painful to live with, you know. I don't need this. Let me go live with my friends outside. They're much nicer to me. You see it happen all the time. And it's just the influence of the modes of material nature covering the intelligence of the living entity into thinking that this is a better situation. And yes, it may be difficult living with devotees. Sometimes it's very difficult. But then if you compare it to living with non-devotees, what's better? What's worse? Yeah? And especially like you live in a brahmachari ashram, you know, you're living with each other in very, very close quarters. You know, it can be difficult. But at least they all have the same goal in life. At least their goal is to please Krishna. Whereas, you know, the materialists, they have the same goal in life, but it's all focused on them. They want to please themselves, and that they'll do anything to get their desired goal. Yeah. So you just, you know, understand how the material nature works, understand how the mind works, that it's just constantly trying to cover us, and just make time. Make time for reading Prabhupada's books. It's so important. You know, like that's why these things are good. You know, like you know, whenever I go out with my wife in Australia and we go to shopping centres and stuff, and she needs to go to the bathroom, I pull my phone out and start to read the Gita. I don't want to, you know, sit there and just watch everything going past them. You know, because you get distracted by it. Because the material nature has got a lot. You know, it's just like, you know, it's getting like this here. You know, you go to these fancy shops, right? And they have all the really bright lights and the clean windows, and everything's really shiny and sparkly. What's the point of that? Is to attract the senses. So whenever you go out in these shopping centres, the whole thing is just geared there to attract the senses. And this is why with deity worship, you know, Prabhupada wanted the deities to be dressed very, very gorgeously with very opulent clothes and everything to be sparkling clean. Why? To attract the senses of the conditioned living entity to something that's worth being attracted to, not to these, you know, shopping centres and fancy cars and, you know, I was coming back from Rohini yesterday and we drove past the Kia showroom. You know, Kia's a car, very, very shiny car, and the lights are all flashing like this. You know, so it's like, come and buy me, and we'll give you a really good deal, you know, and you'll be in debt for the next 25 years, you know. Yeah. That's just the material nature. It's just trying to lure you in. And how does it lure you? It dangles all these carrots in front of you. Yeah? Sex life, intoxication, gambling, meeting, just dangles all these in front of you. It's really nice. You're going to enjoy this, you know. And it's in your ear all the time, telling you all these sweet words. You know, because it mentions previously how Agnudra, how he became very expert at this art of whispering sweet, lusty words into the ear of a woman to attract. And then he, was her name Purport-I think? Purport-I. He attracted her by these sweet words. Yeah? That's material nature. It works like that. It's just telling you all the time, through the mind, through the senses. Yeah? She works through those agencies to bewilder you into thinking, you don't need this. Yeah? So you have to be strong. And I have to, you know, and that's Raghunath Das Goswami's book, Manashiksha. That's preaching to the mind, telling the mind, don't listen to this stuff. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jainita Gopremanandi. Thank you. Any nice questions? Krishna, Krishna, Hare